Let's picture this scenario. You're a man going out on a date with a woman from a different culture. You get to the restaurant, you open the door for her, and you pull out the chair. Now, she looks at you kind of confused, and she doesn't seem very happy about it. This is a story that actually happened to a friend of mine, and if you'd read my book, Sex Before Coffee, it's one of the stories that I mentioned in the book. And it's my friend Rodrigo, who is Mexican, who went out on a date with his girlfriend, who is from Sweden. And she didn't like this gesture because for her, gender roles are archaic. So she felt really uncomfortable about it, and she told him she didn't like that he was too macho. And this is one of the ways that culture can impact our relationship. There is no right or wrong, just the way that we are conditioned to see the world. Recently, I did a podcast with a relationship therapist on the challenges that cross-cultural couples face. By the way, if you haven't seen this podcast, it's really good, so I'm gonna link to it. This conversation has inspired me to make another video about it because I really wanted to talk about the top struggles you are gonna face when dating someone from another culture, and I'm gonna get very specific here. And by the way, I'm now working on country-specific guides on meeting people and dating around the world. I'm starting with my favorite, Sweden, and then working my way to Finland and all around Europe and then all around the world. These guides won't focus on museums or the best Michelin star restaurant that you have to check out, but they will focus on creating connection, how to meet people, where to go to specifically meet people, how to make friends, first date ideas, what do you have to know about this specific culture, are you even compatible with this culture, and much more. I put together 50+ pages in the very first guide, and this is filled with pure information, but it's also fun and engaging and interactive, so you are not gonna get bored. So I'm gonna post a link to it once it's out, so you can go check it out. So as the world is becoming more global, we are now traveling a lot more, we're moving countries, we have options like Tinder Passport or that Bumble option where you can pay and you can select people from different countries. In any case, we're just meeting a lot more people from all around the world. We no longer live in a time where you have to marry your neighbor because they live a few houses over. And there are a few very interesting reasons that we're drawn to other cultures. The first reason is they are exotic to us. So say if you live in Latin America, you may not see too many blonde people with blue eyes. So someone from Finland or Denmark is going to get a lot more attention because of it. As we know, scarcity is attractive. So if something is not freely available, we tend to value it a lot more. The second reason is the stereotypical qualities that we associate with people from different cultures. I have a series where I interview people in different countries on whether they would prefer to date someone from their culture or a different culture. A lot of times in Northern Europe or Central Europe, for example, people pick countries like Italy. They'll say, I really would love to date an Italian or a Spaniard or Latin American, kind of putting them in the same box because they think those countries are a lot more passionate, emotional, and romantic. And this is something that they are missing in their personal life. Even asking people around the world, Italy seems to be the country that people are most drawn to because of those stereotypical characteristics that are associated with Italy and Italians. Or we see American and European men traveling to Asia in search of a more submissive and feminine woman so that they can feel more in their masculine energy. One of the reasons that's maybe not so common, but I'll mention it anyways, and that's pop culture. So a good example of that is women that are now lusting after Korean men simply because of K-pop and K-series. But also this notion of Korean men as being this metrosexual, sweet, gentle, romantic man, and some of the women really love that. But I think one of the really fascinating reasons is that we often don't feel like we belong to our culture. And I think this goes for a lot of you guys. If you can relate to this, please let me know below. The first challenge you might face in your cross-cultural relationship is gender roles. I talk about gender roles a lot in my videos, but I find it super funny how no one can ever agree on who pays on the date because this is such a cultural conundrum. You might think it is a super useless topic and completely redundant because it doesn't really matter who pays these days as we're all independent or whatever, but I can assure you this can end a relationship before it has even begun. Let's say one culture really values gender roles. We have countries like Colombia, Venezuela, Serbia, Albania, Russia, Ukraine, India, Pakistan, Middle East, all of it, South Korea, and that's just naming some of the world. Of course, keep in mind that this is on a spectrum, so Pakistan or Iran or the Middle East would be on the very end of that gender rolled spectrum, while Russia or Poland would be somewhere in between. And on the opposite end of that, we have countries like France, Australia, the Netherlands, Germany, and Sweden. Again, Sweden and Norway being on the opposite end of the equality spectrum. So you get a Persian woman, very high in gender roles, and a Norwegian man, very egalitarian, in a relationship. And the expectations clash. Her expectation is that he's going to open doors for her, he's going to foot the bill in the restaurant. For her, these gestures signify that he can take care of her, that she can count on him in times of need. And in general, they build up his attraction and sex appeal. After all, a man who can take care of his woman is attractive. He is a real man. Now, for him, these expectations are confusing. He's used to women that are self-reliant and don't need him to take care of everything. He wants to feel like he's with an adult who can take care of her finances, not feel like he's taking care of a child. While this gender dynamic would work wonders with your typical Persian, Lebanese, or Albanian man, it would make him feel a lot more in his masculine energy. It has the opposite effect on a Norwegian man. It's super interesting because there is actually no word like emasculated in the Norwegian language. And this is simply because men's masculine values cannot be undermined by women, so women don't need to accommodate for men. The next difference is on how we show affection. Some cultures, as we know, are very high on affection. We're talking Latin Americans, Southern Europeans, Turks, or Filipinos as an example. But it can also vary within a country. In Brazil, for example, we have cariocas that are a lot more affectionate than, say, someone from the south of Brazil, Florianopolis. And this is because the south of Brazil has a largely European population, a lot of Germans and Austrians, and we all know why. We can also see this with Spain, the north of Spain versus the south of Spain, north of Italy versus the south of Italy. On the opposite scale, we have countries that are less physically affectionate. The UK, Sweden, China, or Japan, with Japan being on the opposite end of that spectrum. As we know, showing affection is frowned upon in Japan. Japanese society is all about modesty, privacy, and harmony within a group. This means that showing affection in public would be too much attention drawn to yourself, so you self-censor yourself. So let's say you're a couple. He's Brazilian, she's Japanese. He wants to show the world that they are together, so he's always hugging her, touching her, kissing her. He's very comfortable around open displays of affection, whether it's outside or it's in the house. Meanwhile, she is cringing hard. She is so uncomfortable. So in the end, we have a couple with frustration. He's frustrated because he's not getting his needs met. He's not getting the affection that he wants. And she is totally overwhelmed, uncomfortable, and stifled from his need for affection. She may show her feelings for him in other less obvious ways, but he just doesn't get it because that's not his cultural love language. We have collectivist versus individualist societies. On the collectivist side, we have a lot of countries: Indonesia, India, Greece, Georgia, Morocco, Lebanon, Azerbaijan, Mexico, Serbia, and the list goes on and on and on. Of course, some are more collectivist than others. Indonesia, for example, would be more collectivist than Serbia. But the point is that you prioritize the group over the individual. While the individualistic countries are the States, Germany, Australia, the Netherlands, and the highest on that spectrum is Sweden. Swedes are only 17.5 years old when they move out of their house, and this is the earliest country in the world to leave their homes. For reference, Greeks leave on average at 30.7 years old. And if we're talking about South Asia, for example, it's customary to live with your husband's family for the rest of your life. If you're from a collectivist society, then family plays a significant role in your life, whether you want it or not. You may find yourself wanting to see them often, with every celebration involving your 50 family members and relatives. You may seek their advice before making big decisions, and your mom may even bring food to your house, worried that you're starving. In some of the more collectivist society, there's also an expectation that you're going to take care of your parents when they get old. If your partner leans towards individualism, they may not be too keen on all of your 10 family members staying in your guest room for 10 days in a row, or your mom dropping by completely uninvited, and you may not understand why they only text their family once a month. I actually had this conversation with my Dutch friend about Dutch weddings. Apparently in the Netherlands, it can be quite common to have a wedding party for different sets of groups. And the first group is your parents and relatives. She had told me that it's customary for them to stay for 2 or 3 hours, and then once they leave, the real party starts, which is when friends come. And I was really confused by that because I said, well, what if they want to overstay the 2 or 3 hour welcome? And she said, well, no, they can't because it's already in the schedule. This may be a more extreme case, but when it comes to collectivist countries, everybody is invited and everyone's gonna mingle together, whether it's your friend from college or your grandma. Which brings me to my next point, which is planning versus spontaneity. I find that this one can be more personality driven, but certain cultures like Spaniards, Brazilians, or Argentinians prefer to go with the flow, avoid excessive planning, and thrive in spontaneous and social environments. So if you come from a more introverted, planning-focused culture like Germany, Switzerland, Poland, South Korea, and Japan, this might be a struggle between the two of you. You prefer to spend the evening with your partner, but they always want to be social. You like to schedule your outings in advance, but they love the spontaneity and can never think ahead. For you, 8 p.m. means 7:55 or latest 8:05, while they can waltz in 30 minutes to an hour later. If we're talking about Spain or Argentina, where people eat dinner late, and you like eating dinner at 6 p.m. on the dot. Again, I know some very unpunctual Germans and very punctual Brazilians, so this can also vary. Next struggle you might face is communication. Now, that's a big topic. So if you want me to make a video specifically about cross-cultural communication, then let me know below. As we all know, or as you know if you watch my videos, some cultures are just more direct than other cultures. On the more direct side of things, we have the Dutch, the Russians, Hungarians, Israelis, and Germans. Israelis being some of the most direct of the bunch. And if we're talking about being indirect, Swedes, Filipinos, Latin Americans, and East Asians. Again, Japanese being on the very far right side of the spectrum. And it's honestly so interesting how comparison plays a big role here. So for example, Brits are considered very indirect in Europe. But I had a podcast with a Brazilian psychologist who's dating a British man, and she has pointed out to me that she thinks Brits are some of the most direct people. You know, her boyfriend is very direct, and so is his family. So it really is all a matter of perspective. So let's say you're a Brazilian woman dating a Dutch man, very indirect to very direct, and you want his opinion on a dress that you just bought. So you put it on and ask him his opinion, to which he says, I don't think it looks good on you. I think it looks bad. She walks away completely pissed off. Yes, she had wanted his opinion, but she had wanted him to say something like, oh, you look nice, baby, but I don't really think it's your style, but you look beautiful regardless. He is confused about why she is pissed off because she had asked for an honest opinion. He values honesty, he values their relationship, and he values being honest in their relationship. Now, if we continue talking about communication, some cultures are a lot more emotional, temperamental, and reactive than other cultures. Again, this can vary a lot within a culture because personality comes into play. But if we're talking about generalities, we have Italians, particularly from the South, the Greeks, Latinos, Iranians, Filipinos, that are much more temperamental and emotional. And on the opposite scale, we have Scandinavia, of course. This is why, by the way, I make so many videos about Scandinavia, because it's always on the one side of the spectrum, just like Japan is. I recently talked about this in a podcast about Denmark, which is a really cool podcast. Go have a watch and a listen. But one of the things that we talked about is Scandinavian communication. And what is interesting is in Scandinavia, being emotional is not seen as a positive value, especially if you are negatively emotional, if you're upset, if you're yelling, if you're raising your voice. This is seen as childlike, an inability to contain yourself. In Scandinavia, people tend to hold in their emotions, especially their negative emotions. They're not going to openly share their emotions, even to their friends, which can play a role in why they are the loneliest region in the world, apart from Japan. So if you're used to slamming the door, breaking plates, yelling and causing a scene, something that's not really seen as positive or cool anywhere in the world, but might be accepted, here in Scandinavia, it can mean the end of your relationship. In certain countries like Colombia, South Korea, Mexico, Turkey, jealousy plays a big part in the relationship. I think it's that soap opera culture that seems to have affected people to think that a relationship should be filled with highs and lows, passionate outbursts, jealousy, and strong emotions. If you love someone, you should be jealous. or you don't care. By the way, speaking of Mexico, I just did a video about that. It's super fascinating. We talked about this very same subject. So if you want to know more about Mexico, I'm going to link to it. And of course, jealousy is such a personal thing, but still, I think it's worth noting that jealousy can have a more positive connotation in certain countries versus a very negative and toxic connotation in others. So let's say we have a Turkish woman and a Swiss man dating. They go out to a party and she gets flirted with, but he doesn't seem to care. He's not jealous and he doesn't say anything about it, which kind of pisses her off. So they get home and she erupts with, "You don't love me," and he's totally confused. Why don't I love you? For him, a healthy relationship is one where you trust each other and you have good communication and you leave your partner be, trust that they're not going to do anything. So her screaming at him overwhelms him and it makes him feel she's a little bit mental. And his calmness to her reaction pisses her off even more. Because why is he so disinterested if he's with her? Why is he so lukewarm? What she had actually wanted was just more attention. She wanted to feel that she is loved. And the very last point I'm going to talk about is how much space you leave for each other in a relationship. So some cultures believe that relationships are all about dissolving in them, about becoming one. This I find is really true for Latin America, specifically Brazil, where if two people are together, then they do everything together. But our more individualistic countries like the Nordics or Northern Europeans like to leave each other space, because being with a person doesn't mean dissolving into them, but still having your own life, your own hobbies, and your own interests. And there are a few other points that I have left out, one being marriage and how important it is for you and your family. I have interviewed an Indian girl dating a Swedish guy for my book, Sex Before Coffee. And one of the issues they faced was that she really wanted to get married, and so did her family, and they wanted to invite all of their 300 plus relatives. But he didn't want to get married. And when he had agreed to it, he was like, "Look, I'm gonna have a very small ceremony just for the two of us." Unfortunately, some of these cultural differences can break a relationship. And yes, two people with very separate values can make it work, but they will have to work 3 times as hard. And your partner's hotness, his blue eyes, his Italian accent, is not going to make this process any easier, because that's the superficial thing that you fall for. But in the end, you're going to live and make it work with a real person. So how can you get over some of these issues? Well, the answer is pretty obvious, but you have to communicate, not just communication, the right communication. So not pointing fingers and saying, "Oh, you're so cheap, well, men in my country don't do that," and making him or her feel like they're part of the problem, but really sitting down together and talking about it from a cultural standpoint. This is how we do things in my culture. This is how you do things in your culture. Let's see if we can understand each other a little bit better. And tell them why it's important for you that they do something like this. So maybe it's not that important that your partner take you to 5-star Michelin style restaurants, but what's important for you is the gesture, not the amount of money. Now, if what's important to you is the amount of money, then you probably would be better off dating another culture that is more generous with the spendings and a lot more into gender roles. And be patient. It's not going to happen overnight, and it may not happen to the point that you want it to happen. I would say a Norwegian is not going to turn Colombian just because you want them to. So if they're starting to make an effort, and maybe it's not this grand effort that you're thinking of, still appreciate it and tell them that you appreciate it, because we always want to do more of what people value. So if someone is saying, "Oh, I love this. This was great. Thank you for the flower on my bed," then your partner is going to feel so much better about doing that. They're going to feel appreciated and they're going to do it even more. If you have any questions about any of these issues, please drop them below. This might be something I do a podcast on or potentially another video on. Hope you guys all enjoyed. I don't often make videos like this one. Currently, I have a couple of teams out in the world filming videos. I'm gonna do more of that myself very soon, hopefully, budget allowing. If you guys want to support me, by the way, I have a page. You can buy me a coffee or 2 or 3. And I would really, really appreciate that, because budget obviously helps in creating quality content. And if you want to do something fun and free, I have a compatibility quiz, which basically has some of these very same questions and more. So I'm going to link to that below as well. You can do the quiz, see who you match with, see who you don't match with. Until next time, and as usual, keep breaking down your barriers.